July 10, 2008, fire struck a housing development in the Dishman Hills on the south edge of the Spokane Valley, just blocks away from a bustling business district. Fortunately, no injuries or deaths occurred during the fire, but the effects of that fire on the residents, their homes, and properties will be felt for years to come. The fire burned over 1,000 acres and destroyed 11 homes. At one point, over 450 firefighters were on the scene. For those whose homes were destroyed, this is just the beginning, as they work to put their lives back together. As the boundary between rural forest lands and residential housing areas becomes more blurred, the risk of a wildfire threatening homes, property, and lives becomes very real. The residents of the Park Hills and Park Meadows housing areas were aware of the danger, to the point of contacting the Department of Natural Resources for advice and assistance. At the request of the landowners, the DNR and Spokane County Conservation District met with a group during the spring of 2008 to explain the Firewise program and offered each landowner a Firewise risk assessment. Through the months of May and June, 48 such risk assessments were completed, the last of which was done just 2 weeks prior to the fire. The interviews you're about to hear are testimony to the value of defensible space around rural homes and the stories of the harrowing experience of living through wildfire.
We had just started to clear the property and had quite a bit of clearing done, but I had Steve Harris and Len Broderson come up and do an assessment to help me decide whether we needed to clear some more. And I think Len was the first one, and then Steve Harris, and then I think Al came up the third time. When they did their assessment, they told us that, basically we were sitting pretty good, and Steve said, he would have no problem parking a truck in our driveway. It was a huge relief for that. It helped immensely to have them come up and give us that assessment, and then we could just we had a couple spots that needed improvement, but I felt a lot better on that. There were a couple residents that had asked me some questions based on what we had done on our property. I just kind of thought maybe we should have a talk, mostly because I was so impressed at the assessments that were done. And so we had Garth come in and do his presentation, and that's how it started. And by the time the meeting was done, I think we had 99% participation. Garth wasn't there very long either, but it was obvious how important it was to the residents. So that was the beginning. I closed my blinds that morning and I walked out and I thought, if there's a fire, maybe the windows won't shatter into the room. And drove down the hill, and it was just one of those days I'm going, man, this feels really good leaving. And then got a call that afternoon from my sister. She didn't say anything, just wanted to know where we were, what we were doing, if we had the dog with us. And so we sat down at the news that night. And it was just amazing. It was such a numb feeling watching it. And we fortunately had a place we could be and stay. Nothing we could do. Couldn't get back up here. So we had phone calls in the interim. People contacted us and let us know the status in between and little pieces that they think our house was standing. And we were numb. We got a phone call 10:30 that night, Friday night, I think it was, from a friend of ours. There was a fire truck in our driveway saying our house was still standing. It was a sleepless night, but I can't imagine those that were here. We heard some great stories, especially up above us. We drove back. They let us in on that Sunday, I believe it was, to get some things, and it was so eerie. And then we drove around the corner and saw all of the burn and everything around us and saw our house standing there. I can't explain the feeling of that, nor can I, explain what the people went through that lost their homes, but driving around that corner and seeing all the burn around us and seeing our house standing was indescribable. It's a good thing I wasn't here. Advice to homeowners, especially the ones that are rebuilding now, I hope they take into consideration what happened and make sure that they build accordingly, and the type of materials you use. And we were very fortunate with the siding that we have, and that's where the defensible space actually, I'm sure, played a part. But it got awful hot in the fire. I don't know how much longer it would have held up. I would highly recommend huge defensible space below you, and perimeter, sprinkler systems, which we do have, but generators, we learned we should probably have one of those. for those that are on wells, and we lost all the power. So none of that could be run. Numbers, neighbors' numbers, phone numbers and things I didn't have in my cell phone. And obviously a fire escape plan. Escape plan would be huge. And there were people that actually went out and over the other side. And we're actually, I think, quite lucky, because in the fire that we had, and there was such high winds and spot fires, it was pretty risky to do that. Technically, they should have been able to get out, but we had worst case scenario right up our no outlet access. We had it come right up the road, and that's a worst case scenario that could have happened, and it did. If we hadn't had the meadow, it could have been really ugly for some people. There wouldn't have been an escape route. They would have nowhere to go other than stay in their homes or at their homes, and that would have been kind of ugly. You'd think it'd be common sense, but didn't really think about it. Keeping the meadow grasses low, wherever your escape plan is, have that maintained and keep the grasses low, so it will give people a place to go. Before they even start building in these communities, to have some kind of program and protocol for building and doing landscaping and things before the fact. A lot of the homes obviously had thick brush and trees around them. And the road up here, being it's a no outlet, so important to have those fire fuel material away from the road. That was a big thing here, that it should have been maintained a long time ago, because it was an issue for fire trucks and the safety. I don't believe they could make it up parts of the road because of that. The fire was jumping the road, so access is huge. That all needs to be taken into consideration and make sure it's clear for any kind of an emergency.
We had the Firewise people come up and do an assessment. Part of the reason we moved up here was to live in the woods, so you don't want to take down every single tree. What was helpful was trying to find a balance of what still gave you the beauty of the land and why you moved up here, but also gave you a defensible space. And so we actually were able to put into place some of the suggestions, and we did thin a lot in the spring. Who knew that the fire was coming, but it did. A lot of the people who came up here during the fire and after really felt that what attributed to the fact that our house didn't burn was the fact that we had the defensible space around our house. So I think at first we might have erred on the side of privacy or trees, and now we're kind of erring a little bit on the side of safeness. So we expanded our green belt even a little more. Plus, a lot of trees burnt, so we just got those out because they were dead. So that helped make some of the choices. But we did go through and definitely thin some more and look for feasibilities of fire approaching and trying to slow that down as much as possible. After the fire, I think that got everyone's attention, and a lot of it has been implemented in all that we got. Forest management up here, different groups, and even the individuals who didn't join in that. Everyone's I think, real concerned about having that defensible space. And because we're all on acreage, we used to just think in way of just protect your home, but now we're thinking in more of a community. The way that the fire blew, it went over our main road and then was coming directly over our exit road. And, we can't have 5 exits out. You got to be practical. It was a little chaotic. Accurate information is hard to get when there's a quick crisis. And so we visibly saw the smoke, but we had never been in a forest fire before, so we thought, well, we'll just rely on the news. Or in fact, my wife called the fire department, and they told us everything's fine. They know there's a fire. Stay where you're at. If we do evacuate, we'll let the news station know. Watch the news, and that'll be your first information. So no sooner about 15 minutes later, we were watching the news, and they said evacuate. It took us about 5 minutes to evacuate, and we got down our driveway, which is about 300 feet long, and at the bottom of it, where there was a fire deputy and a sheriff, who said, no, the road's closed, the fire's crossing the road. So we were actually trapped up here for about an hour and a half while the fire crossed over the road out of the development. And there was about 30 of us up there, but it was helpful to have those 2 people up here. They kind of directed us to a field. As a community, we had a big, wide open area, and we've always mentioned that as a safe spot to go. So that's where they took us, and It was uncomfortable, but personally, I never felt life-threatening. I just felt like we needed to stay calm and stay in that area, and the fire engines were on the other side of the road waiting to come up, and we'll just wait for them to make it. The biggest change in me is that you always feel like everyone feels like the fire will never happen to them. I would change that to the fire will happen to you. And so there's always a balance to be made, but you need to include that in your building plans and where you live, or even as a home association, give heed to the fact that a fire will at some point come through, and just make sure that you've taken a reasonable effort and invited the people in who know about the fires. And I would definitely recommend to act upon those with what's beneficial and practical. Getting the information is the key.
I went back up to my home and turned on the sprinklers and got out the hoses and just started waiting. And a little after 5 o'clock, the fire was approaching directly to my north, traveling in an easterly direction. And I thought we gotten lucky that fire was going to pass by us to the north. Unfortunately, at about 5:20, after it passed by and it burned one of the neighbors' houses, the wind changed and then it started blowing directly towards us. And for the next hour and a half, the wind changed directions maybe 4 or 5 times. Each time it changed direction, it was just as intense, sometimes blowing due south, sometimes turning and blowing directly west, even though the force of the fire was going to the east. So it was just a big swirling kind of a fire and create its own wind, and it sounded like a big freight train. Fire came at our house from at least 3 different directions on different occasions, but at the last moment, both my house and the neighbors' houses were spared simply because the wind changed direction. I have a lot of greenery out to the west side of my property, which protected my west side, but I had nothing to protect my north side down the hills. So I was watering it down, but shortly after 5:20, as I looked down the hill, I could see that the fire was rolling across Park Road, and it burned the Norman's house, and then it burned the Reynolds house. And about that time, my power went out, so I lost my well, so I had no more water except for my fish pond. Quickly went out and got some buckets and got a fire line going off to the north side of my property. From that time until 7 o'clock in the evening, I was just lone hand bucket brigading out of my fish pond down the north side of my property. And the fire continued to flare up all around the property. And around 7 o'clock, the first fire teams arrived up here, and they came to my house where a lot of the fire was at that time. Fire had spread past my house towards the south, and they basically were able to stop the fire on the backsides of their green belt from spreading any farther to the east from that direction. Had it not been for my green space off to the west side, there was no way I could have saved my home. I was scared to death that because I have vinyl siding, that it was going to catch. That was my big fear off on my west side. And on my north side of my property, I have decks that stick out into sort of a wooded area, not very many feet, less than 30 feet away from the timber line there. And some of the trees, had they caught on fire, there would have been no way that I could have stopped the fire. And I had no water at that time, so just in time the Cheney Fire Department arrived, and they got right on the fire as it approached the north side of the house. Well, I didn't have time to be frightened. When you looked at that wall of flame coming at you, let me tell you, I had my car turned around and pointed down the hill with everything in it, and I was gonna get down the road and away if it gotten much closer. But if the wind had changed, I couldn't have saved the house.
My name is Steve Harris. I'm with the Washington State Department of Natural Resources Northeast Region Office. I'm the Landowner Assistant Section Manager at this time, and which manages the Fire Prevention, Forest Stewardship Program, and the Small Forest Landowner Office. The first real Firewise contact we had with Park Hills was in collaboration with Fire Safe Spokane. We approached the community in 2003 when we had some National Fire Plan grant funds to do outreach and fuels reduction work for private landowners. We provided free fuels reduction work for landowners, and In return, they just had to agree to maintain the property and reduce fire risk around the property, sign a statement saying they'd agree to manage and maintain that property for fire safety. We had 2 landowners in particular that signed up with the program, the free fuels reduction work, and we did some treatment on their properties. Fortunately, those properties survived, really kind of a testament as to the success for Firewise. After that, we ran out of those grant funds, and securing funds in Spokane County for that type of outreach kind of dwindled. The National Fire Plan started ratcheting down on what type of grants we could secure, and so we were targeting high-risk communities for many years. And then in 2006, I was approached by Shar Hemingway, one of the landowners up there in Park Hills. And so the Hemingways were quite concerned about the fire danger. They had built the house fairly fire-wise. They scored relatively well, and fortunately, their house did survive the fire up there. They were lucky, and in part due to some good landscaping they'd done. The other thing that we wanted to pursue was the Firewise USA program. To me, it was a perfect place to approach. They have a homeowners association, so there was a good inroad to get into the community. Working with Shar, talked to her a little bit about the idea of Firewise communities. She was on board with it. With the grant funds Spokane County Conservation District had secured, I thought, this is a pretty good community and be a good place to get started on this program. And so I met with Garth and basically handed over what I had started to the Spokane County Conservation District. There was a lot of risk assessments that took place after that, a lot of work that was being done up there in the Park Hills community just prior to the fire itself. And I was looking forward to seeing that become our next Firewise Community USA candidate. Then, of course, the fire happened, and that pretty much threw everything into a tailspin. This won't be the last fire on this hillside. That's the first topographic rise the Dishman Hills is as you come in off of the Columbia Plateau. And so these windstorms come in and fan the fires. 85, we had a big fire up there, 91, 92, and now 2008. Every few years there's going to, be a good-sized fire up there. And now, instead of just trees and brush, we have a bunch of homes peppering the hillside that are just another source of fuel for the next fire. So really, this is an area we need to approach. We need to work with these homeowners up there and continue to educate them and encourage them to build Firewise. The good news is if they do the right things, build good defensible space, fire-resistant materials, homes don't need to burn. And people don't risk up there like they were with this last fire. And now, of course, the attention's there, and hopefully we can capitalize on that and not have people forget wildfire is going to happen.
The interviews you have just heard should serve as a reminder to everyone living in forested areas. It's not a matter of if a fire will strike, but when it will strike. Will you be prepared? Do you have defensible space around your home? Unfortunately, all too often the memory of disasters such as the Valley View fire quickly fade, and the valuable lessons that could be learned are not. Wildfires all across the U.S. in 2008 were the cause of thousands of homes being destroyed. Those fires are stark reminders that living in rural forested areas is a calculated risk, a risk that can be minimized with defensible space. And remember, the best time to make your home Firewise is before the next fire starts.